Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session where Thomas is going to talk about a really key topic of privacy as code, which for me is very interesting because, the thing about privacy a lot of times is about scalability. So we always talk about, you want to have everything as code these days. So of course, that privacy should follow that. So really looking forward to seeing these ideas and a lot of these open source developer tools that we can use for data privacy. Thomas, over to you.
Yep, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Thomas Piana. I'm an engineering manager at Ethyca and leader of the Fidesctl project, which we'll get into in a little bit. And at Ethyca, we're building the trust infrastructure of the internet. So at Ethyca, we believe that privacy is a fundamental human right. It's something that everyone deserves. And so we see a lot of new laws like GDPR, CCPA, and PIPL, and they're requiring privacy to be at the core of every business. And that's kind of led to a new term, privacy by design, right? Like things need to be baked in, they can't be an afterthought. But these laws are creating a lot of complexity, a lot of friction, maybe even a lot of panic in some organizations, because privacy by design hasn't really been achievable for businesses until now. And so Ethyca is trying to figure out why is that? Why is this so difficult for companies to achieve? Well, it's pretty simple when you look at it, right? Because privacy today is considered after the software is shipped, right? It is an afterthought. And that leads to a lot of pain for both the lawyers on the compliance side and the developers on the software side. So at Ethyca, we believe the only way to solve this issue, truly, this issue of user privacy, is to make privacy a continuous part of software development. Make it part of the software development lifecycle, a native one. So we do this by building that trust infrastructure for the tech stack. Okay, so let's dig into what is trust infrastructure. Well, to Ethyca, trust infrastructure is Fides. This is an open source set of developer tools for privacy by design in any business tech stack. So Fides helps engineering and data teams ship privacy compliant systems effortlessly, baked right in. Fides gives developers tools to implement that privacy by design. And you can see Fides slots in right next to your database, right next to your backend, right next to your version control is an integral part of that stack. So with Fides, developers are empowered to solve pressing legal and compliance privacy challenges at their source. So on the left side, before the deployment happens, you've got the coding in the CI/CD. That's covered by Fidesctl. And then right of the deployment, we've also got Fides Ops, which is going to cover the rights and enforcement and the reporting. So we've got tools to cover both sides of this equation. Let's dig into the primitives of Fides, right? What is the foundation of this open source language that we're creating for people? And that would be Fideslang. So the basis of Fides is a description language that enables your engineers to annotate the privacy attributes of your tech stack. So in other words, you can describe the personal data and its characteristics that are everywhere in your organization. The list of primitives are as follows. You've got data sets, systems, which can be grouped under registries, organizations under which everything must belong, policies, and then you got the Fides privacy taxonomy. We're going to dig into each one of these a little bit deeper to give everyone a good idea of what that means. So first up in our building blocks is data sets. Pretty self-explanatory, but a data set declaration in Fides is anywhere that data could be stored, right? So it could be database, data warehouse, caches, other data storage systems, such as a third-party API, anywhere that might live. And then within a Fides data set, you declare the individual fields. So database columns is an easy thing to map it to, and then annotate them to describe the types of data they're storing, what the data category is, what the data qualifier is. Next up, we have systems. A system declaration in Fideslang is going to describe the privacy properties of either a software project or a service or code base, microservice, application, what have you. So the Fides system declaration describes both the categories of the data being processed as well as the purpose of the data processing using that Fides privacy taxonomy. Next up, we have the policy. A policy declaration in Fides language represents a set of rules for privacy or compliance that the system must adhere to. And the key thing here is that a policy is your privacy policy as code defined using the Fides privacy taxonomy. It is a codified version of your privacy policy. And what this allows us to do is to compare it against that system, to compare it against that data set, and make sure that everything is lining up. And finally, we have the organization. The organization represents all or part of an enterprise or company and establishes the root of your resource hierarchy. So if everything must belong to an organization, and everything can only belong to one organization. So they're kind of like silos for your privacy. So resources cannot reference things in another organization. They all have to be in the same one. Here we have the privacy taxonomy, and this is something really revolutionary because these taxonomies, these 4 taxonomies, we're creating a lingua franca of privacy within the space that currently just doesn't exist. It's too fractured. And we've created it and we've open sourced it in the hopes that everyone across the industry can just standardize on this. And we can make it something that everyone can read. So first up, we have data categories. Those are going to be labels to describe the type of data being processed. Then we have data use, and that's going to describe how or for what purpose a component of your system is using data. So data category could be something like system or user email, anything of that nature. There are about 77 that we have currently, and we're expanding them as we keep finding new niches that need new descriptions. Data use could be to provide a third party with information. It could be to improve the current product. Anything that describes what the data use is. Next up, we have data subject. That's going to be a label for who is having their data processed. Could be customer, employee, anonymous user, anything of that nature. And then finally, we have the data qualifier. Data qualifier is going to tell you what the degree of identification is for the data that you're using. So that goes all the way from anonymous, completely anonymous, all the way to identified with, pseudonymous being somewhere in the middle as well as some other tiers. If you want to get a really good overview of everything that there is to offer in this privacy taxonomy, at ethyca.github.io, at this link, you can go to what is the Taxonomy Explorer, basically, and we have different visuals. You can drill down and see how the hierarchy works, because these are taxonomies. So there are lots of trees, lots of child nodes, things of that nature, to help people be very granular with how they describe things. So what can you describe with Fides? As we've just gone over, you can talk about the types of data that your application is processing. That'd be using those data categories. You can talk about how your system uses that data. So using the data use annotations. So if you have a system that is sending data off to another place, you can describe that in the system and let people know that's what your system is doing. Next up, you can write those policies that you want your systems to adhere to. And that's the really key thing there, right? Is writing those policies and so much more. And we'll get into that in a little bit too. So currently, on top of this Fides Lang, with it being the foundation, Ethyca is working on 2 products currently. So we have Fidesctl and we have Fides Ops. And as I mentioned before, Fidesctl is handling everything on the left side of that deployment equation, with Fides Ops handling everything on the right side. So Fidesctl are tools for developers. They exist as part of the software development lifecycle, and it pushes privacy left, the same way that security has seen a big shift left over the past 5 or 10 years. And the main use here is to run compliance checks in CI/CD pipelines. So it gets the same first-class citizen status as things like testing and linting and all those things. That should be happening every time something gets pushed to a pull request or a merge request, and then every time code gets merged back into the main branch. We also have Fides Ops. So Fides Ops is a runtime application. It's going to run within your system, and it's going to have a complete map of where all of the data is living within your infrastructure. And that's going to help it automatically manage data subject requests to comply with GDPR, CCPA, anything of that nature. So you send it a request. It says, okay, we've got this email. We know this is the primary key. We're going to go fetch or delete or pseudonymize, anonymize all the data throughout all of your different data stores. Now we're going to hop into a Fidesctl demo just to give you a little bit of an idea of how this all works. To quickly break down the components of the Fidesctl system, we've got the database, which is the persistence layer. We've got the Fidesctl web server, which just mostly is there to handle the persistence, things coming in, things going out. And we've got the client. So that could be CI pipelines, that could be a local CLI. Fidesctl is a full-fledged CLI in addition to the web server and the database. So to get started with Fidesctl, it needs to be configured via a TOML file. I've left a link there where you can go visit our documentation page and get a little more information. But for the most part, you need the server URL, database URL, things like that to get up and going. Once that's up and going, you're running the web server. You can do a ping to make sure that the web server is accessible, and then a view config so you can see all your values and make sure everything is set up correctly as you would expect. Now that everything is set up and working, let's start digging into some of the really important things you can do to get everything set up, to prepare for those evaluations and those compliance checks in CI. So the first thing we need to do is we need to do what we call applying. And if you remember, like apply from Kubernetes, this is where we got it from. It's the same type of concept. You have YAML files locally, YAML descriptions, and then you are parsing them, ingesting them, and then sending them off to the server to be persisted in the database. So it's going to parse and ingest all those things from a YAML directory, YAML files in a directory, and then send them to the server. We have a dry flag, so that does not send changes to the server. You can run things locally. The dry flag is what you're going to be using in pull requests, for example, where you don't want to actually do anything destructive because it's still a pull request. And then you can also diff. So this is a really handy feature. It's going to show you exactly what the changes are in values between your current stuff, could be local or in your branch, and then what actually exists on the server. So let's look at what a passing apply looks like. So we're going to run Fidesctl apply Fides resources. And there you go. All green across the board. It's processed all of our resources, process all resources. We're good to go. Let's look at what a failing one does. Oop, there we go. So we were missing a field for a system. So it's going to give you useful. We've really worked on this, is trying to make these error messages as useful as possible so that you know exactly why something didn't work. On top of that, all of our validation is done client side for all of these resources. So that provides a really snappy experience. You don't have to wait for any kind of requests or anything like that. It's going to happen client side before it even leaves the CLI. We hope that makes it a better experience. So building on top of apply, we have evaluate, and evaluate is really the crux of why Fidesctl exists. Evaluate is going to take your system's privacy declarations and your organization's policies and your data sets. It's going to combine everything and it's going to compare them, and it's going to let you know whether everything is aligning, if there are any violations, anything of that nature. So this is really the crux of why this exists. So for Fides key, you can specify a single policy to evaluate instead of where by default it will evaluate all policies. You can pass it a message to describe the context of your evaluation. This would be really useful, for instance, if you wanted to automatically put the get message in the message of the Fidesctl evaluate. So when you look at those evaluations, you can see what the get message was for that evaluation. You could put in version tags, anything of that nature. Just add some more context to what that evaluation was doing. And then you also have a dry flag, same as apply. This is non-destructive. It means that it won't send any of these changes to the server. Give some quick examples of what this looks like in action. So we're going to evaluate those resources. And the evaluation passed, all green. So what it's doing is you're passing it a directory. It's doing the same thing as apply. It's ingesting all these files. It is also grabbing files from the server. It's figuring out everything that references each other, pulling all those resources together, making one giant list of resources, and then evaluating everything. Here I have an example of an invalid one. So this is going to be where a resource references another resource that doesn't exist or that it can't find. And it's going to let you know that that error is going on. And finally, we're going to have a failed evaluation. We'll look at this more in depth later when we get to our evaluations UI, but this gives a really robust error message around what exactly caused that failure, what the attributes were that caused it, and then some kind of like a more readable English statement of what was happening there. So evaluating resources is, like I said, kind of the crux of what's going on here. This is what you want to run in your CI, and this is what's going to make sure that you are automatically confirming your compliance as you develop your software. So in addition to those foundational features, we also have some helpers. These are designed specifically to lower the barrier to entry to Fidesctl and to just make sure that people can get into this privacy by design with as little friction as possible. So first up, we have Generate Dataset. People have a lot of data stores, they have a lot of databases, they have a lot of tables, they have a lot of columns. So doing that by hand would be a huge chore. And one of the ways we decided to really cut down on kind of the boilerplate is to just help people generate all this. So currently we support Postgres, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, and we're also working on Snowflake and Redshift connectors with more in the future. And this is going to go out, talk to that database, and it's going to traverse the entire thing and write you a dataset.yaml file, as you can see here. So that's great. You know, we've got the dataset.yaml file, but as you can see, the data categories are all empty. Right? We haven't annotated it yet. We don't know what it's really doing. That's where our next command comes in. Annotate dataset. What this is going to do is it's going to ingest that dataset.yaml file, and it's going to go through and find which fields, which tables, which datasets don't have any data categories assigned to them. That's going to give you the option to add them on, as you can see here, or if you add something like an invalid, right, data category that doesn't exist anywhere in your system, it's going to give you an error. So this is kind of a guided step through annotating your data sets. So again, lowering the barrier to entry, walking users through it, making privacy by design possible. Next up, we have the evaluations UI. This is another nice feature we've added recently that lets you go to a view page on the web server and see what all of your evaluations have done. So here we can see we've got a bunch of passes and then those violations we talked about earlier. You can see exactly what violated. So we have 2 violations here. And then we can see what the data categories, subjects, uses, and qualifiers were. And then we have the detail, which is a more human readable version of what went wrong in that evaluation. So we know, compliance and kind of the lawyer persona, probably not going to hop into a CLI and run some commands to read JSON, right? So the evaluations UI piece is really important for letting them know what's going on within the software systems. We also have a Taxonomy Explorer built right into the web server. So the Taxonomy Explorer we looked at earlier was static and built in as part of our documentation, but this is actually going to be on your own server, right? So if you end up extending the data uses or extending the data categories yourself, you can still get the power of that Explorer. So we have different graphs you can do. As you can see, you can drill down, you can see the whole tree. Again, just trying to make it easier for someone to go through and figure out exactly which data categories or uses are going to apply to their data and make that annotation process easier. So as we've just gone over, Ethyca is going for privacy by design for all people, all organizations, because we believe that privacy is a fundamental human right. As part of that, we're building Fidesctl and Fidesops on top of this open source lingua franca of privacy, Fideslang. And we want to show you that it's simple to spin up Fides in your org. So the product lives as a free and open source code repository, always accepting contributions. And we've really focused on time to value, right? So we've got a 15-minute quick start engineering guide in our documentation. And in addition to that, we've got robust documentation and dedicated engineering success support to help get you up and running. Now, I'd like to transition into a Q&A and answer any questions anyone might have. Okay, I don't see any raised hands. So if there are no questions, I guess I'll turn it back over. Oh, I see questions. Here we go. The taxonomy is completely customizable. So we have a default taxonomy because we want to make sure that every Fides web server comes loaded with the default taxonomy. And we do define it in the code in the repository, but it is extensible. Everything is extensible. So if you wanted to write additional data categories or uses or subjects, you could absolutely do that and then apply those things, and then they would work just as normal. But unlike everything else, we do actually have a default taxonomy that's going to come with every installation and lives in the code base. We don't have presets for certain regulatory frameworks. This is something we're working on currently. It's actually going to be either in this release or next. We're going to have some default policies, but nothing for specific regulatory frameworks yet. But that is something we're looking at. Any other questions? Okay, thank you all so much for coming to my talk. I hope you learned something. I hope you're excited about privacy moving left and just becoming a standard part of the industry. And I would love to see everyone come check out the repo. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to open an issue. We're very active, obviously. That's where we do all of our work, out in the open. And we'd love to talk to you. We also have a Slack channel. You're welcome to join. And we just had a new release last Wednesday. We released 1.2, and we released our original 1.0 in November at Web Summit. So still pretty young, but these are ideas that have been prototyped at Ethyca for a few years at this point. So we're really excited to finally show this to the world and get it out there. Thank you all so much. Should I just go ahead and end the call? I'm assuming that's what I should do. Thank you all so much.